To start? Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm now delighted to get things underway for panel 6. And this is about traditional and local knowledge in the BBNJ implementation. And we have a mix of speakers with us here in Rio and online, as we have done in all the sessions. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our chair for this session, Leandra Goncalves, who is professor at the Federal University of Sao Paulo. So, Leandra, please take it away.
Thank you, Hermione. Thank you, everyone. I'm glad we just have the coffee break, otherwise everyone would be so hungry and this very important issue would not be attentive for everyone. So thank you for being here. I would like to thank first Andre and the INPO team for organizing this whole event, but also for including this panel on traditional local knowledge, because sometimes we have this feeling that as we are discussing high seas, those peoples are not taking part or they are too far away to be there, but they are not invisible, they are here, and we want to discuss their role in this agreement. So it's a real pleasure to chair this session. I guess with the entry force of this BBNJ agreement, this is one of the topics that brings us lots of novelty, because the pathway to include local ecological knowledge, and more than that, going beyond that, including those people in these international negotiations, is a pathway that is not done, is not built, and it is unclear how we are going to build that. So I believe this is a very crucial opportunity where we can discuss, we can reflect, and we can bring some elements that give subsidies for the people who are working on the implementation to see how we are going to include those people in the negotiation tables. I can share with you as an interdisciplinary marine scientist that sometimes we hear that, okay, so now we have to include those local ecological knowledge, let's invite anthropologists, sociologists, geographers, or interdisciplinary scientists that can bring knowledge from the communities. But I spent, I guess, the last 3 weeks traveling across the São Paulo coast, and what I have heard from those communities is that they don't want anyone providing their knowledge in those decision-making process. They want a seat at the table, and we will have to see how we're going to do that, because I guess this is novelty. It was very good to hear my colleague Dave Jobura in the previous panel, because I guess IPBS has some lessons learned, and I guess we can use that for the BBNJ. So today's discussion is therefore not only about principles or conceptual discussion, is about practice, and how can traditional and local knowledge genuinely inform decision-making in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this panel will bring together perspective from law, governance, indigenous knowledge systems, science, and policy practice. And our goal here is to explore how the BBNJ framework can move from acknowledging, which we have already in the paper, from the knowledge diversity toward the real co-production of knowledge for ocean governance. I believe Alexander Turra, in the keynote speak today in the morning, he brought some ideas on how we work on the science and policy interface. And for this, we should discuss how we work on the co-production of knowledge and policy interface. So when I was watching the panel on the scientific panel before this one, I guess we were missing one letter. We have the scientific, technical, and we are missing people that should be part in this advisory body as well. One thing that I would like to bring here as a contribution to this debate is that the implementation phase we are entering right now is a phase where we can discuss opportunity to design new models of collaboration. This is not This is not clear yet, but we have the opportunity to build something that is novel on international level. So rather than reproducing existing hierarchies of knowledge, we have to build something that is new. And a second issue of concerns is the architecture of expertise within the treaty itself. So many international environmental agreements rely heavily on science advisory bodies, and science, of course, is very important. However, if the BBNJ Treaty truly intends to recognize multiple knowledge systems, we may need to think beyond a purely scientific advisory body and consider a broader knowledge advisory mechanism. And I think we have to build that for the implementation phase. And a third important issue relates to representation and equity. So at the same time, we think about how local knowledge can inform global governance. We must also consider practical pathways for scaling knowledge across level. And this is a big challenge we have ahead of us. So local knowledge rarely scales directly. We will have to build a way for having this scaling up. And possible mechanisms, in my perspective, include regional knowledge hubs that connect communities and synthesize observations, participatory monitoring initiatives involving fisheries and coastal communities, formal inclusion of knowledge holders in advisory body and governance bodies, and research process built around co-production of knowledge. Ethical protocols, prior informed consent, and fair benefits sharing are also essential to ensure reciprocity and respect. Finally, we need knowledge translation platforms and boundary organizations. These will be key actors that we have to consider when we are discussing the BBNJ implementation phase. So, given the limited time, I have asked each speaker to keep their remarks in about 5 minutes. And I have here on myself on the stage and also Mariana Caldeira. But we have our other panelists that are with us online. I asked them to focus on concrete ideas, practical pathway, or critical reflections on how traditional and local knowledge can be part of the implementation agreement, not only integrated, but also as a partners in this process. So let me introduce now our speakers. We have online Mario Vierros, Director of Coastal Policy and Humanities Research. We have Fran Humphries, Associate Professor at the Griffith University Law School. We have here on the stage with me Mariana Caldeira, researcher of Ocean Voices at the University of Edinburgh. Ghazali Ohorella, sorry if I didn't pronounce it the right way, my fault, my accent. Co-chair of International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change. And Yara Rodrigues, executive board member of Instituto do Mar, IMAR. Just like myself as well, I'm Federal University of São Paulo at IMAR, Instituto do Mar in Portuguese. So thank you, everyone, to join us online and taking part of this panel. I'm going to follow the order we have in the program book. So I'm going to ask first to Mario Vierros, Director, Coastal Policy Humanities Research, to start with her presentation. Thanks, Mario.
Thank you so much, Leandra. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you very loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this important panel discussion. And I would just like to start by reminding us that the BBNJ agreement really made history in how it acknowledged the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities. And this is extensively throughout the treaty text. And the BBNJ agreement also included cultural factors as an indicative criteria for identifying area-based management tools in Annex 1, which is something that's important when we think about the establishment of MPAs or other area-based management tools in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So as you said, traditional knowledge, along with science, is really central in providing the knowledge base for implementation of the agreement, but it is also much more than that. So in this brief presentation, I just had three main points that I wanted to include regarding traditional knowledge. And firstly, I think there's still some uncertainty amongst the delegates at the BBNJ meetings about what traditional knowledge, or cultural factors for that matter, means in the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, whether it's the deep sea or the open ocean. And I just want to talk a little bit about what our research into this topic has turned up so far. Second point I want to make is that it's important to have ethical safeguards in place for sharing traditional knowledge. Not all traditional knowledge is meant to be public, and much is restricted to specific people, communities, or purposes. So because of this, traditional knowledge should only be shared with free, prior, and informed consent of the community that owns it, and of for the purpose that the community wants to share it for. And then thirdly and finally, and I won't touch on this very much because I know others will, traditional knowledge cannot be used without the full and effective participation of the owners of that traditional knowledge, the indigenous people, so in some cases local communities as well. So it is important that the BBNJ agreement puts in place the mechanisms and the pathways to facilitate that participation. So I will draw in this presentation on a project that I'm part of. It's called Weaving Indigenous and Local Voices for Ocean Stewardship, and it is supported by the Ocean Voices program. This project aims, among other things, to better understand the traditional and cultural knowledge related to areas beyond national jurisdiction, as well as to produce a georeferenced deep ocean knowledge map of cultural knowledge. So with that introduction, let me just start talking about the first point I made about the nature of traditional knowledge relating to the deep and open ocean. And we're finding out, in fact, that there's quite a lot of knowledge out there, and that we're really just beginning stages of understanding what that knowledge is. But I just wanted to list some examples. Just firstly, there's the knowledge that arises from traditional navigation or the movements of people. And some examples are things like Polynesian voyaging and the things that they understand of the ocean through that voyaging. Australian Aboriginal people's songlines, which extend under the sea as well. And then there are the long distance journeys that are made by the Inuit in the Arctic and the Maori all the way to the Southern Ocean. There's also quite a lot of traditional knowledge that relates to migratory species that cross ocean spaces. For example, migratory animals such as sea turtles, sharks, seabirds, whales, fish, and seals have cultural significance and associated knowledge for many peoples around the world, whether it's in Latin America, Pacific Islands, the Pacific Northwest, the Kamchatka Peninsula, for example, just to name a few. Migratory species mean different things for different communities. And in traveling from coastal areas to the high seas, these species connect communities with each other, and also to the ocean, both culturally and ecologically. Then there are origin stories that relate to the ocean, which are present in many cultures around the world, including my own. But some of these relate to specific deep sea geographies, such as the Hawaiian Kumulipo, where life emerges from the deep sea. And many of you may remember Uncle Sol from Hawaii describing this story very eloquently. There are also other stories. For example, the indigenous Haida in Pacific Northwest have a story of people emerging from the ocean and the formation of a specific seamount. Other cultural connections include, for example, the ocean as a place of residence for ancestral spirits for the Zulu in South Africa, while the soul returns to the sea after death, and then from there it is reborn again back to land. But there's also perhaps more recent history. For example, the Atlantic seabed, the Middle Passage, can be considered a culturally important seascape for peoples of African descent due to the history of the transatlantic slave trade and the almost 1.8 million Africans who died at sea. And this is both tangible and intangible cultural heritage, which should be considered under the cultural factors criteria Annex 1. So these are just a few examples, and there are many more. But it's important to keep in mind that this knowledge is about much more than just data and information. It is about how people relate to the ocean, how they understand it, and the meanings that it provides for them. Ultimately, it also is about identity. So we might keep in mind that while we're talking about knowledge, we're also talking about values that connect us to the ocean. And these are values such as reciprocity, respect, duty to care. And when we take these values into account, they can also transform how we view ocean governance, including the context of the BBNJ agreement. Now, my second point relates to how to put in place ethical safeguards relating to sharing of traditional knowledge. And this is something that we grappled a lot as we're compiling the Deep Ocean Knowledge Map. So we're concurrently also developing a code of conduct for responsible sharing of ocean stories, together with the participating knowledge holders. So this is a co-creation process we're going through. But this code of conduct serves as a template that has things like the ownership of the story stays with the storyteller and the community from which it originates, so they're fully in charge. Stories will be shared in accordance with the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, and for the purpose that the community wishes to share it for. No knowledge or information will be made public or shared without the express permission of the storyteller. And while some knowledge can be fully shared, some cannot. And in those cases, there might be a general summary, whatever the knowledge holders are comfortable with, or perhaps just a marker to indicate that there's knowledge here. With perhaps context for the owners of the knowledge or their representatives, and they can then consider any request to share the information for the specific purpose. So these are some general principles that we're putting on paper and taking into account, but we work with each knowledge holder individually to make sure that we include their specific conditions for sharing that are important from their particular perspectives. And just finally, and very briefly, I wanted to touch on my third point about the fact that traditional knowledge cannot be used without the full and effective participation of the knowledge holders. Knowledge is always part of a specific place and context that needs to be understood. And this means that the BBNJ agreement will need to put in place mechanisms to facilitate participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities. These may be various structures such as bodies and modalities support participation, including in a scientific body, but not limited to that. And there are lessons that can be learned from other treaties and processes. IPVES was mentioned, that's certainly one where knowledge co-creation has been done quite effectively. But there's also room for innovation in the BBNJ context. And I'm sure that my colleagues on this panel will talk more about this aspect, and I will just wanted to highlight the importance of actively supporting participation. So I'm just going to leave it on that for now and say thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very thoughtful comments, Mario. And I will now pass to Fran Humphreys. The floor is yours, Fran.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and the Yagara people as the First Nations custodians of the lands where I'm coming from in Australia, and I pay my respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. I'll confine my intervention to the implementation of Article 13, which is the framework for the traditional knowledge obligation. So under this obligation, parties must take measures with the aim of ensuring that traditional knowledge associated with marine genetic resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction that is held by Indigenous peoples and local communities shall only be accessed with the free, prior and informed consent or the approval and involvement of Indigenous peoples and local communities, and that such access and use must be on mutually agreed terms. So this largely mirrors the framework under the Nagoya Protocol, which is the regime for traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources within national jurisdiction. And that is largely for consistency between these jurisdictional areas because, of course, knowledge doesn't stop at national borders. But parties need to take, the Article 13 itself doesn't explicitly incorporate benefit sharing measures into the framework. but the benefits can be imported through mutually agreed terms. So in other words, on a case-by-case basis with the knowledge holders and the knowledge users. So unlike the benefit sharing regime for marine genetic resources and DSI, where benefits either flow back to the multilateral mechanism or flow to the public through open access modalities, benefits from the use of traditional knowledge need to flow back to the knowledge holders themselves. Of course. And so Article 13, though, provides that access to the traditional knowledge may be facilitated by the clearinghouse mechanism. And this is a significant shift away from the Nagoya Protocol, which just basically leaves it up to parties to figure out how to do this. But it's also uncharted territory, and it will require careful consideration of some of the lessons learned from other regimes like the Nagoya Protocol, which has had some challenges for delivering expected benefits to knowledge holders. So first I'll talk about lessons for identifying the relevant knowledge holders. Secondly, I'll talk about preserving data sovereignty. And thirdly, embedding epistemic justice into the institutional arrangements. So on the first point of identifying the correct knowledge holders, under the Nagoya Protocol system, people usually seek advice from the national focal points. But in some countries like Australia, there are also representative bodies for Indigenous people as a first port of call. Now, there are initiatives for mapping the location of Indigenous communities, but it's challenging and often culturally inappropriate to map knowledge systems themselves, which may include secret knowledge. So there's also increasing scholarship by Michaela Massimi and others around knowledge systems of local communities, which are separate to Indigenous communities. Now, local communities or local knowledge often has communal origins, is experiential in nature, and is usually relating to the concept of place. Now, linking these mapping databases to the clearinghouse mechanism would require complex data architecture. It would need to be community driven, and it would need to be flexible to manage disagreement over mapping for potentially decades to come. So a second practical step in implementing the traditional knowledge obligation is to preserve data sovereignty. So in other words, to ensure that any references to traditional knowledge in BBNJ procedures explicitly preserve ownership and cultural context. So traditional and local knowledge is not a data set to be mined. They're living knowledge systems that's tied to identity, customary law, and stewardship responsibilities in many cases. So preserving ownership and cultural context means designing access and use procedures that are co-designed and co-produced with the knowledge holders and not merely consultative processes. So one strategy is to embed what's called the CARE principles into the clearinghouse mechanism architecture. And this is along with the FAIR principles, which are already in the treaty text. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But CARE stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. So what this might look like in practice for the clearinghouse mechanism could be, for example, for collective benefit. It could mean providing data in formats and languages that's useful for Indigenous people and local communities' own research and conservation efforts. It could mean reframing equitable access by thinking about the risks of open data and instead prioritising safe access to the data. In terms of authority to control, data architects could work with communities to implement traditional knowledge labels or other digital tags and consider how this might interact with the BBNJ identifier and other labelling and transparency obligations under Part 2. There could also be an alert mechanism in the notification system where traditional knowledge is used or an activity occurs that might trigger the traditional knowledge obligation. With respect to responsibility, there could be opportunities for funding training for curation and data management practices that support the rights and interests of traditional knowledge holders. There could also be a compilation of data about how the knowledge is being used, although the clearinghouse mechanism does not have a curation function, so it's unclear how this might be achieved in practice. In terms of ethics, Mario's already talked a lot about the ethical safeguards, but it could obviously ensure that there's no release of data that's going to expose sacred or sensitive information, but also ensuring links between the knowledge obligation and other ABS procedures, including, for example, the cultural heritage, or ensuring or minimising harm to cultural heritage under the environmental impact assessment mechanism. So getting back to the 3 lessons, the third and final lesson that I'll raise today is an opportunity to move away from the Nagoya Protocol's distributive justice model and incorporate more of an epistemic justice approach. So distributive justice is a fairly surface level approach that reallocates resources based on certain criteria like need. Epistemic justice, on the other hand, goes much deeper, and it attempts to dismantle knowledge hierarchies that have devalued certain knowledge systems and excluded Indigenous people and local communities from decision making. So epistemic justice aims for the equal treatment and representation of different ways of knowing. So one example is the artificial separation of marine genetic resources from digital sequence information as distinct regulatory objects. Now, the traditional knowledge obligation only explicitly applies to knowledge associated with marine genetic resources and not DSI. This has been an area of contention under the Nagoya Protocol. So perhaps interpreting Article 13 through the lens of epistemic justice could help to resolve some of these more difficult issues around scope. So these are just 3 practical options for implementing the obligation in a way that's both consistent with the Nagoya Protocol and in line with the forward-thinking architecture of the clearinghouse mechanism. Thanks.
Thank you, Fran, very much. And I will pass now the floor to Mariana Caldeira, which is here with me on the stage. Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you, Leandra. Bom dia a todos. Thank you, Andrei, and all the organizers for this event. Today, I'll briefly highlight the role that traditional knowledge play in the establishment and management of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, as well as for environmental impact assessments under the BBNJ agreement. Indigenous and local knowledge systems offer deep insights into ocean connectivity, seasonal cycles, and long-standing relationships with the ocean. These insights can support more effective marine protection while also safeguarding the perspectives of indigenous peoples and local communities. First, traditional knowledge can support the identification of ecologically and culturally important areas. Indigenous peoples and local communities often hold long-term observations of marine ecosystems, species behavior, and ecological connections across large ocean spaces. These insights can complement existing knowledge, as we saw before from the panel of STB. So we have this complementation of existing knowledge when identifying those priority areas for conservation. In this sense, integrating traditional knowledge is not only about adding information, but also creating space for dialogue between different knowledge systems, while also ensuring their meaningful representation in ocean governance. Second, traditional knowledge can inform how those ABMTs and marine protected areas are going to be designed and managed. Many indigenous peoples and local communities have developed governance systems and resource management that promote the sustainable use of marine resources. Those experiences can offer lessons learned and valuable insights for developing effective conservation measures. So this is particularly important when we are considering ecological connectivity, corridors between marine protected areas, coastal areas, and the areas beyond national jurisdiction, especially when we are considering migratory species, as my colleague Mario mentioned before. However, integrating traditional knowledge into ABMT's processes also raises questions, particularly regarding how this knowledge can be shared, protected, and used in the decision-making process without being extracted or misinterpreted during the process. Third, traditional knowledge can also contribute to environmental impact assessments. So the participation of these knowledge holders can help evaluate potential impacts of proposed activities on ecosystems and culturally significant areas, while also supporting and monitoring the species and ecosystems across national jurisdiction. So this closer participation can strengthen implementation and help ensure that activities are consistent with what are the objectives of the BBNJ agreement. Finally, traditional knowledge can help connect conservation efforts across jurisdictions, linking coastal initiatives, coastal conservation initiatives with ecologically connected areas in the high seas. So those experiences highlight that traditional knowledge systems already support effective marine stewardship and can offer valuable insights for better decision-making in marine protection, while we are also ensuring that communities are connected to these ecosystems and they are meaningfully engaged in the process of ocean governance. So to help ensure this proper engagement and representation, the Pacific Small Island Developing States have proposed last year the establishment of an advisory mechanism on indigenous peoples, local communities, and traditional knowledge under the agreement. So this mechanism could provide a platform for discussing cross-cutting issues related to traditional knowledge and allow indigenous and potentially local communities to nominate their own experts to participate in the scientific and technical body and other subsidiary bodies rather than relying only on parties or states, as Leandra has mentioned before. So the upcoming PrepCom and the first COP can provide this important opportunity for us to further shape how this participation takes place in practice, help ensuring that different knowledge systems are not only recognized in paper in the agreement, but also meaningfully reflected in the implementation. Recognizing and engaging traditional knowledge holders in the process is crucial to build not only a more inclusive, but also a more holistic and ecologically relevant approach to governing our ocean. Thank you.
Obrigada, Mariana. Thank you very much for your insightful contribution. And I will call on the stage right now Ghazali Ororella. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And apologies for not being there. I'm in Geneva right now. I can tell you it's super cold. I wish I was in Brazil at this point. But obviously, thank you so much for the organizers for organizing this and also framing the conversation in this way. So I'm Ghazali Ororella. I'm BBNJ advisor to the International Indian Treaty Council, which is an organization of over 100 indigenous peoples from North America, Latin America, Caribbean, Arctic, Pacific, working primarily on the rights of indigenous peoples. Much has been said so far, very great presentations. So I will add one simple point, which transpired through our continuous consultation with indigenous peoples, including recently we had one with the Pacific consultations organized with our friends at the High Seas Alliance. And in that conversation, like one thing came through very clearly, that if implementation is meant to protect biodiversity effectively, then it has to be built in a way that we can actually work with the strongest possible knowledge base. And for indigenous peoples in particular, that has three practical implications. First, indigenous knowledge, because we prefer to refer to indigenous knowledge rather than traditional knowledge, must be able to shape outcomes and not just inform them. The second point is that it has to be present where technical and policy choices are actually being made, and not brought in as an afterthought or later once the frame is already set. And the third point is that it has to move under indigenous consent or free, prior, and informed consent protocols, accountability, so that what gets called knowledge use does not become knowledge extraction. And that is also how we, and that's why I like the setup of this panel, is that how we understand co-creation, not as a soft word for participation, and not as a placing different knowledge forms side by side and hoping for the best, but actually as building implementation in a way that allows different forms of knowledge to meet early, shape decisions together and do so on fair terms. So if I unpack like the 3 points one by one, the first point of indigenous knowledge must be able to shape outcomes and not just inform them. Indigenous peoples, the vast majority of indigenous peoples have been very clear that the knowledge of indigenous peoples is not just a body of observations waiting to be translated into someone else's framework. Absolutely not. It comes with governance, it comes with responsibilities, it comes with protocols, relationships, and tested ways of managing human interacting with the ocean. If you look into the Pacific, like we had this conversation the other day, and people spoke very clearly about ancestral sailing routes, sailing waters, sacred sites, and reefs, waters where their people have passed away as well, tuna fisheries, et cetera, and also that the future of their relationship with the natural environment, with others, and with their own communities. I mean, one knowledge holder actually captured it very clearly that our relationship with the ocean is built on reciprocity. We take only what we need and we protect the health of the ecosystem so that future generations, North America talks about the next 7 generations, our future generation can continue that relationship. So to us, and it should be to the wider world as well, that this is not folklore. This is not a cultural add-on or an attachment. It's governance logic for indigenous peoples, and it matters directly to biodiversity outcomes. The second point that I wanted to bring up was also that indigenous knowledge has to be present, where all decisions are being made. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's in the BBNJ agreement, and the BBNJ agreement itself has a richness when it comes to reference to the indigenous people's rights, knowledge, forgot one word. But the thing is that because once knowledge enters an institution, the institution decides what counts, what gets translated, what gets validated, what gets sidelined, and what gets acted on. So from an indigenous people's perspective, timing matters and location matters. If the knowledge of indigenous peoples only comes in through consultation after proposals are already developed or after categories are fixed or assessments are already framed, then it's actually being asked to fit into a system built by others. And it has been, in the introduction, was shared like co-production. Well, the thing is, like what I mentioned before, that's not co-production or co-creation. That is basically contribution without authority. And indigenous peoples have been very clear about this. We are not just another stakeholder group in ocean policy. There has been a call for an observer status for indigenous peoples, separate from civil society, for real participation, for real influence, and for practical mechanisms that allow that participation to matter. And that's exactly also why we have been advancing the idea to complement the previous presentation of an indigenous advisory mechanism. It will be a practical mechanism, dedicated indigenous body under the COP, grounded in indigenous self-selection and grounded in the 7 indigenous social culture regions. With that grounding, it will be designed to ensure that indigenous experts or knowledge experts or representatives are not sitting outside the system waiting to be consulted, but actually are structurally present where their work is already done, with COP authorized placement of representatives as members in bodies such as the scientific and technical body, clearinghouse mechanism, every subsidiary body under the COP to supplement this work using indigenous self-selection rather than state-controlled nomination, which is the difference between being heard and having influence. And then the final point is that knowledge has to move under indigenous consent, protocols, and accountability. Without that, what gets called knowledge integration can quickly become extraction, like I said before. And this matters especially when knowledge is documented, stored, circulated, and reused. But the thing is, the principle is much broader than that. Indigenous knowledge does not exist apart from the peoples and governance systems that hold it. It includes ecological knowledge, yes, but also governance systems, sustainable use practices, responsibilities, cultural protocols, and rules about how knowledge is shared and protected. So if knowledge is taken out of that context, documented, circulated, and used without proper consent and accountability, then the system is not respecting knowledge. It's extracting it. So if we bring this back to implementation, what it means in practice for area-based management tools, EIAs, like could go on and on and on about talking about them. Information sharing, MGR, Article 13, everything, it means that knowledge cannot move as it were like a free-floating data. It has to move under indigenous consent, control, authority, protocols, and obviously also multi-agreed conditions. So I'll like to conclude with just one framing or one punchline, that the real test is not whether indigenous knowledge is welcomed rhetorically. The real test is whether the system, the BBNJ system, is built in a way or can be built in a way that allows the strongest possible knowledge base to shape outcomes, enter early, and remain governed with integrity. Because that is where co-creation becomes real, and that is also where implementation becomes stronger. So I'll leave it at that and much looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghazali, very much. And before I pass to Yara Rodrigues, I will remember everyone that's watching us online or even here in Rio de Janeiro can send questions through the Slido platform. So don't forget to bring your reflections and questions. And then I will pass to our last, but not less important panelist, Yara Rodrigues. Are you here with us?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today online. I had hoped to be there in person, but unfortunately, it was not possible. So I think you're able to see my presentation. It's a very short one, I promise. My colleagues did a great job for me. They did a very good resume on very important topics. And I'm glad because I brought today some couple examples that we could then think further about these examples of indigenous and the local relevance for knowledge in the BBNJ Treaty. So I represent the Alto-Mar in Cabo Verde, and we work under the Ministry of Sea umbrella that together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had a very long process to ensure that Cabo Verde was among the 60 countries to ratify the BBNJ agreement in the high seas. So this is very important because as a small developing state, but a big ocean state as Cabo Verde is, we do face different type of challenges that varies from marine pollution to climate variation constraints, data constraints, big gap in conservation process laws and framework, and unsustainable fishing, as we are going to see why is that important also for us. And in the BBNJ context, ratifying was very important because it could then actively potentialize our participation in international decision making, contribute to the whole process of conservation, access to more robust and systemic technological and financial resources, and the milestone per se that we achieve by doing that is also that help us to address the critical environmental gaps, as I was saying, that we have in the government. I would say that while BBNJ focus in the high seas, the sustainability of the ecosystems depends also on coastal communities' knowledge and livelihood. So it's not straightforward and it's very complex, as my colleagues also pinpoint. So then participatory frameworks are very important because they offer different type of lessons that we can use to implement international policies and treaties for the BBNJ. So for Cabo Verde, this is true as for many other seats and other small island countries and countries that ratified or are in the process. We have different type of coastal communities that we rely on. Most part of them, they are very specifically for fishers in a broad way. And it holds something that is very important also, that is the intergenerational knowledge. And this comes with many things. Before talking of some of the topics, I really wanted to say that it's very important that many of the concepts that we have in the agreement, like area-based management, science-led decision-making, impact assessment, and capacity building, are very familiar to fisheries. And by sharing this expertise, this area of fisheries can influence the way that the agreement is also implemented. Because livelihoods and food security are also very central concerns for the topic and for Cabo Verde. And within the BBG agreement, we know that the focus on the conservation is very explicit and address the sustainable use of the ocean resources, as for the fisheries, for example. So then the participation of the fisheries sectors, it's very crucial to ensure that this agreement supports all of these goals. So this goes through seasonal cycles, species behavior, long-term environmental changes, and also other topics as ecological patterns, differentiating and providing different type of knowledge for us, as also my colleagues pinpoint. So Cabo Verde waters are ecologically linked to the high seas through ocean currents, migratory species, and ecosystem process. And we already started doing different type of co-production of knowledge, which was one of the points that my colleagues also brought as being very important for these cross-boundary approaches for the resilience of ecosystem. So there are different type of participatory projects that we are trying to rely on, projects that can bring more knowledge to data architecture, notification, and also potentialize the sovereignty. And at IMAR, for example, I brought here some examples that combine science, traditional knowledge, and participatory governance, as for the example of co-design in ecological corridors, marine management area, integrating local priorities, but also for self-reporting data for fisheries, as the fishermen are doing here in the country. This is a work that was co-created with Brazil, and all the process was through co-design and integrating science-based knowledge. So then this is very important because it makes these points as a shared stewardship in the decision making, ensuring local voices and shaping sustainable policies. Another project that I brought here that Cape Verde is also part, but also altogether with Nigeria, that also Marjo mentioned in one of the papers that she wrote, is the WOLF project for the digital twins in the model of marine pollution, which is a great problem here in Cape Verde, and also relies on ecosystem dynamics to foster data set in this co-design technology process that was done in a participative also project with the community. Also, there is another project that we are part of that it also relies on the co-design process, partnerships with the Germany institution, Geomar. That is this co-design of Futuro project, that is a co-design of land-based field studies and integration of capacity development in the West Africa across 13 countries. We did a meeting with all the different sectors. This is also an example of how bringing the local knowledge and mixturing with the scientific knowledge, it's very relevant for successful actions. I also bring another one that we did, which is for the ocean observation and the digital twins, which is the two campaigns that we did with OceanX, one with Ocean Quest and the other one just with OceanX, and some other institutions as INPO that is here also pretty sure attending the event and is part of the organization, which I also take the time to say thank you. We are working in digital twins for the seamounts and fishing grounds, and the main and basic part of the project was done in co-organization with the fishermen's and the Association of Fishermen's Community and the governance here in Cabo Verde. This was a very nice beginning of international cooperation on the process of the deep sea, because we are going for the open ocean, but also deep sea systems, where we are going through different concepts of biodiversity parameters. And we had a very good start in collaborative monitoring, improving for decisions as the results are coming. Also, we have a very strong component of digital twin. This is to supply some of the data process that we have gap in the country, and also brings together different type of local observation with global management frameworks in a general way. We have more regional and national projects that we are doing all together with other cooperation also, that brings the empowerment of the communities in transferring capacity, giving them different type of trainings and capacity for to do divings and to co-create with us methods and systems to go after those data. I also think it's very important, lastly, to say about not just the national, regional cooperation, but also the international networkings that we are building. I brought here two examples, one for POGO, the partnership for ocean observation, but also AORIA, that I'm also pretty sure that some of the components are there, and all the integration that we are doing in the community in order to not just doing the empowerment, capacity transfer, but also, and I think most importantly, bring their knowledge to the table. And as someone said at the beginning, they don't want just to participate in what we are doing. They want to be part of the campaigns, as we did, bring them to the campaigns, bring them to the conference, and hear what they have to say. And also, lastly but not least, is the relevance of the ECOPS and the ocean literacy in this process, that we are trying to bring also in all the projects that we do, and we do support in the institution, but also in the country. Thank you very much for the organizing. Very happy to be here with you.
Thank you, Yara. Obrigada. Nice presentation. So now we have 5 minutes for questions. Is there anyone on the audience? Because we don't have anyone on the slide also. Can we take? Yes, Daniel.
Thank you, Leandra, and all panelists. It was really great to hear from you. Well, my question is, I will highlight this regarding the topics about needs and interests of traditional and local communities. All the panelists mentioned in some way, but I would like to hear more about, are we looking to these actors as agents in the BBNJ agreement, and less passive and more protagonist way of approaching these groups? To what extent were traditional and local needs and interests considered in the BBNJ agreement? And what about its potential conflicts with the needs and interests of the sectors?
Thank you very much, Daniel. I will pass to our online panelists. Are still with us? Do you have a take on that? Is there anyone who wants to contribute with this question? Yes?
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
1 second, Yara.
I mean, if we look to these groups as actors. I think it's being made, but are we looking to these groups as agents? We have a nuance here when we talk about the groups and the sectors, economical sectors. Economical sectors are agents. They have protagonism. And the actors sometimes are passive considered. Does that help?
Yeah, so how we consider those indigenous and local communities not only as actors, but as protagonists of the process on BBNJ. I can pass to Mariana and then Yara. Thanks.
Thank you, Danielle. I think this is a golden question. From what I understand, I think when you say agency, we have, I think the establishment of this advisory mechanism is part of this active positioning of traditional communities and local communities as well. And I understand that indigenous peoples and local communities within the BBNJ agreement has a major role, and it's not just about another stakeholder or another actor. How this is going to be in practice, I think it is going to be challenging, even not considering knowledge holders, but also considering all the interests in play. I don't know how this is going to be in practice, but I hope that the interests and concerns of indigenous peoples and local communities are put as priority as we already seen in the BBNJ Treaty. Yeah.
Yara, do you want to add something?
I think it goes in the same direction. And actually, in the last part of my presentation, I was saying how relevant they want to be perceived. And I think it was you that you said in your opening remarks, they want to be part of the table, right? So I think we can, I don't know how to use this in semantics, but I can see them both as actors and agents of change in this governance process that we are going through. And when communities are genuinely involved through co-management, participatory monitoring, and citizen science, and all of that process, we move from being passive actors to active agents, and the changes that we do and the shaping that we do tend to be more sustainable in a bigger way.
To add something, Ghazali, Mario, Fran, do you want to add something? Ghazali, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just my 2 cents on this, which is pretty much in line with what the previous speakers have said as well. I think the BBNJ, like the hard law, is clear on indigenous peoples as well as local communities, their role within the BBNJ. Like there's over 3 dozen references to indigenous peoples, local communities, traditional knowledge, rights, cultural values, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the hard law is clear on that. In addition, like all decisions need to be made with the best available science and also traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples as well as local communities. That is the hard law. And now it comes down to how do we operationalize, breathe life into the BBNJ agreement. And I think that is what we're going to try to do per COP3 leading up to COP1. In terms of tension with other sectors, the thing is, particularly from indigenous people's point of view, I can imagine some tension arriving when it comes to the identification of MPAs. What if indigenous knowledge holders say, well, this is a better area than the other one? But when it comes to, and let me circle back. When it comes to the view of indigenous peoples, that we are not actors, we're not vulnerable groups. We're actually rights holders, distinct rights holders under international law. So that's what a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is within the preamble. So I think from an indigenous point of view is that we see ourselves as protagonists, actors. Like the thing that it goes back to the age-old sentence: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we'll definitely like try to make sure that we're continuously are at the table.
Provide my 2 cents. I guess let us not be naive that in these international negotiations we have power behind everything. So I guess it's up to us as scientists and communities themselves and their representatives organizations fight for the space and for more balanced power in those negotiations process, because of course power will be a very important variable in this space, and we have to work to build more balance in this space, because it's going to be hard for them. So I guess we have to work together. I heard here in many of the presentations, connect, integrate, collaboration, let us be part, co-design, co-production. This is not done. This is a way to be built. And if we have a consensus or an agreement that this is very important, crucial, imperative, we have to build a way for that. And we have to be committed. And this also has to be built. We have time for one more question. Noel? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. My question to the panel is, what is the most effective way for subnational island jurisdictions to engage in this process? Should we push to approach the UN directly or work through our sovereign state that is responsible for our foreign affairs? Or should we engage only through our local national government? Or should we cast our net wide and broadcast to all 3 of these channels? What approach would you recommend to ensure that subnational communities are meaningfully considered in the process?
Which question? Anyone want to take that? Maybe Fran or Mario, as you...
I can give it a shot, and I think my advice would be to engage on all levels. Engage nationally, certainly, but there's also a possibility of engaging directly with the BBNJ process, participating in those meetings, participating in side events, making interventions through an NGO or through an indigenous organization, for example, that's accredited to be part of that, part of the BBNJ process. And also a possibility of national delegations in some cases. So it's really, I think, in all and every way that you can engage. There's a lot of different pathways for this, but I'm sure others can provide more insight on that.
Anyone?
I don't have too much more to add to what Mario said, but I think that this forum, the BBNJ treaty itself, the framework, and also the way that it's been negotiated, and also the preparatory commission is very inclusive. And so I think I've been watching other fora like, say the WIPO area, there's CBD, Nagoya Protocol. They're grappling with very similar issues, but I think from the perspective of the BBNJ agreement, it's very much, it does have a different feel in terms of it being very much a collective kind of everybody coming together to really genuinely work together and listen to what different knowledge systems, perspectives, but also, in terms of whether it's subnational voices, national. So I think that this is a huge opportunity to really show how other fora, how it can be done in terms of bringing different voices in to be active developers, co-designers of the institutional arrangements itself, as well as the modalities and procedures that flow.
Thank you, Fran. Mariana?
I think in this sense, one thing that I may add would be, for example, when proposing marine protected areas, we have the consultation phases, and I think that actors and right holders, as Ghazali mentioned, have the opportunity to engage directly for the BBNJ agreement, and also the opportunity, depending on the proponent states and the national interest in consulting those communities and indigenous peoples as well. So I think in terms of, I think EIAs as well, so ABMTs and EIAs, we have this opportunity.
Thank you, Mari. Unfortunately, our time is over now. It's lunchtime before we come back for the afternoon session. So I would like to thank you very much, our speakers, for insightful contributions and also for the audience. I would say that I agree with Ghazali. We have in the law, in the paper, the door is open and it's on us to occupy and develop. We for sure have a social learning curve because it's a very novelty, this the many mentions we have in the treaty, asking us to consider, include, connect with the local ecological and indigenous knowledge. So let's keep the door open and occupy whenever we can. I would say that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Leandra, and to all your panelists. I thought that was a really effective use of online and on stage about a really fascinating topic. So thank you all very, very much. Another great session to lead us into our lunch break. I did let things run over a little because we've got a slightly extended lunch break today, so I was feeling kind. We will be back at 2:30 for the afternoon of satellite events. Now, for those of you online, consult the website to get that up-to-date list of what's happening this afternoon. For those of you here, have a look at your printed brochure or online. We've got 4 events. 2:30 in here, we have a great event arranged by the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture of Brazil. And then up in the observatory room, if you go out this door, it's just sort of to your left and up a small ramp. There is a lift if you need that, if you'd prefer to use that. It's upstairs there, and that is organized by the Sargasso Sea Commission. Hopefully you will have pre-registered for one of those events. If not, we still have capacity, very much so here in the Maid Auditorium. If you're here in person and want to join that Sargasso Sea Commission one, we also have some capacity up there, although it is a smaller space. We've got some other satellite events in the afternoon starting at 4:30, so have a look at those 2 as well. Just a reminder, at 4 o'clock, you can go into the exhibition. Yesterday we had a really, I thought, very wonderful tribute to Christina Gerde. And we also have a short film about the contribution that Christina made. And we're going to be playing that here in the auditorium at 2:15. It's just a 7-minute short film. But if you would like to come back a little bit early and see that, please do so. But right now, it is time to take a break and head out for lunch. Thanks again to our panel. See you later. Bye-bye.
I'm going to take you on a voyage to some place so deep, so dark, so unexplored, but we know less about it than we know about the dark side of the moon. It's a place of myth and legend. It's a place marked on ancient maps as "Here be monsters." It is a place where each new voyage of exploration brings back new discoveries of creatures so wondrous and strange that our forefathers would have considered them monstrous indeed. We are talking about the high seas.
Christina is as immortal as the ocean. She has shaped the world for millennia to come.
Christina Gerde, IUCN. I'm really excited about the outcomes of this past 2 weeks. We've had a lot of detailed proposals for what the new treaty could look like. And if you actually strung together the most ambitious bits, you would really create a beautiful platform for continued cooperation in order to improve the current status of the high seas and how we're managing it. Fingers crossed we keep up this momentum. It's really important that we continue to educate one another, to exchange views, thoughts, creative ideas, and find a common platform into the future.
In many years of working with Christina, I saw that the siphonophore couldn't be a more appropriate symbol of her ability to create community to achieve great things. Siphonophores like this apolemia blur the line between individuals and colonial organisms. One of Christina's particular aptitudes was to bring people together for a common purpose, ocean conservation.
Christina was a guiding force in ocean conservation. She inspired me as well as many others. She will be deeply missed, but she will live through her legacy and all those she inspired.
Christina was a singular person. She was a true visionary. She could imagine what a better world would look like for the oceans and the marine life in the high seas. She mentored and empowered so many people, and particularly so many women like me. And her legacy will live on as we all find a way to keep moving forward with her in mind.
The first time I heard of the high seas was through Christina, of course, when she gave a talk on the TED stage. Little did I know 12 years ago when I watched her presentation that this amazing woman who I had not yet met would shape my professional career for those 12 years and for many more to come.
Christina was such an incredible mentor to young professionals in the ocean space like myself. I had never quite grasped, my interests and how they came together as when she helped guide me there and helped show me, what is possible in this world.
My work beyond national jurisdiction is going that it really is an area of common concern of all of humanity. How we are managing it does affect the welfare of us all. And how we move forward in many ways depends on how we can galvanize international cooperation to understand why it is we should care and how we can all benefit from moving ahead.
She taught us in every interaction we had with her how to approach things, how to be inclusive, how to listen, how to be curious. All that is there with us, and it is our responsibility and our duty to remember it, to embrace it, to share it, and to continue her legacy, which goes beyond BBNJ into a broader sense of how to address the very daunting challenges that we have without falling in the trap of desperation. Being inclusive, being curious, being optimistic, being smart about things, just like she was.
A lot of our lofty projects at the moment fall apart because we think we have to do it alone, and we never recognize how to create space for others to come in, to co-lead, to co-design. But Christina did just that. She recognized the value of community. She recognized what a community of purpose around a mission looked like. And she made sure to bring everyone on board.
We will miss you badly. Not only as people, but all the ocean life that you work so hard to protect. Rest in perfect peace, and we are with you in spirit.
She was a visionary. She first had the vision of protecting the high seas long before the workshop when it really started. But also to really encourage so many of the next generation of cohort of ocean conservationists and lawyers.
So I'm a firm believer with my recent introduction to science diplomacy and its many faces, and I'd love to learn more about how we can start to apply it in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So with that, I'll say thank you.
Oops. And I think that we really honor her tribute, but carry on her legacy and the path that she has set out for all of us.
I'm deeply grateful to have met her, to have benefited from her mentorship, to have benefited from her kindness, but also her incredible brain, that incredible brain of hers. I've learned so much from her. So thank you so much, Christina, for everything.
I'm forever grateful for her and for her leadership, for what she's done for this world, and for what she's inspired us all to do, to pick up the baton and have yet another reason to carry forward with protecting the high seas, now also in her name, and to carry on her work.
Christina's legacy is the community that she drew together and the international agreements that we have contributed to under her leadership, and of course, her friendship with us.